Hello readers, I'm the Avid reader. So previously I've talked about my 10 favorite novels. So now I'm gonna talk about the 5 least favorite novels that I have read. Coming in at number 5 is The Sky People by S.M. Stirling. This is alternate history where people are colonizing Mars and Venus. Now I have several problems with this book. First of all, it has a weird fantasy ending. An alternate history is supposed to be a subgenre of sci-fi. And if it includes sci-fi, that's fine. But when it includes some weird fantasy stuff that abandons all reality with history or science, then it stops being plausible or interesting. And also this book is written in a boring, confusing way. So when I read this book, I kind of stopped paying attention. There were some interesting elements in this book. You have dinosaurs and you have Neanderthals and humans coexisting on these planets. But overall, this is mediocre alternate history. At number 4 is Lord of the Flies by William Golding. The start of this book is okay, but then it just goes downhill and it's boring. He keeps talking about the geography, the fauna, the creepers, the foliage. It's just boring. And then towards the end, it just becomes confusing about some weird pig stuff, and then people get killed in a boring way. It's not really interesting. The plot should be interesting, children devolving into anarchy, but it's written in such a way that it's tedious to read. This is a classic, and this is among the several classics that are not that well written actually. Next up, you have The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Now, throughout reading this book, it's just boring. And it's described in a way that you don't feel really part of this world. It's hard to pay attention in this book. There's one character in this book that's maybe kind of interesting in a chapter or two, but otherwise it's boring. And this is the most anticlimactic murder I've read in the book. It's such boring. Action is usually interesting in books, but Scott Fitzgerald somehow makes it boring. And also none of the characters are likable. They're just violent, rude, mean people. This is a caricature, you could kind of say, of rich socialites. Coming in at number 2 is The Plot Against America by Philip Roth. Now this is alternate history and it does have some interesting alternate history elements, kind of. But overall it's a bad book. It caricatures a lot of American politicians to behave in a lot worse way than they do. It glorifies some horrible American politicians like Woodrow Wilson. Also, it has people being hyperbolic throughout the story where the president, who's supposedly a fascist, doesn't really do anything until the last 50-100 pages or so. And the penultimate chapter is a conclusion to the story, but then the author adds a needless extra chapter at the end of the story, covering the same events, more boring. And the penultimate chapter of the good guys winning is kind of how you would expect a bad YA dystopia to end, and pretty much none of the main characters in this book are likable. So you follow a Jewish family, but you have the parents who hit their kids a couple times. You have the main child character who goes around following non-Jews, stalking them. It's just what's that? And this is supposed to be alternate history, but a lot of it is just the life of a Jewish boy, which is quite boring. And this could have been an interesting book of following the lives of a Jewish family in a country where you have anti-Semitism and their rights are deteriorating, and the country slowly eroding the rule of law and going towards authoritarianism. Now, there's a good book where this happens. It's called Joe Steele by Harry Turlove, where a Stalin lookalike guy seizes power as dictator in the United States. It's not a plausible book, but at least the concentration of power, the persecution, it doesn't all happen at once, and it never becomes a complete authoritarian dictatorship, and that's a gradual development of authoritarianism. This book, it's just bad alternate history. And what's the worst novel I've read in my opinion? Well, that would be The Yiddish Policeman's Union by Michael Chabon. Remember how I said that there were at least a couple of interesting elements in The Plot Against America? Well, The Yiddish Policeman's Union doesn't really have any. The synopsis should sound interesting. Jews not establishing their own state in Israel, instead they have their own colony in Alaska, and you follow the story of a detective, but the plot is structured in such a way that you're just confused. So one thing happens after another, but it's not well described, and you just read through this book and it just goes on and on. And a lot of things happen, but you don't really feel that they're connected, and there's some conspiracy, but it's just the worst novel I've read. The worst alternate history I've read overall. And it's not that the characters are caricatured in a way like in other bad books I've read. It's just a book that's written in a boring, confusing way. So this was me, the Avid Reader, talking about my 5 least favorite books. And if you actually want to know what my 10 favorite books are, then you should check out my video, my top 10 favorite novels. Anyways, I'm the Avid Reader, and I will see you readers next time.